Hey everyone, so a while ago, and I mean over a year ago at this point, I made a video that was 5 boas you've never heard of. And I thought it went over pretty well, but lately I've noticed that there are quite a few of the animals on that list are starting to gain more recognition and a little bit more popularity when available. So today I want to talk about 5 more boas that you've never heard of. And to start things off with, we're probably going to start with one that you may have, at least out of the list that I am going over today, and that is the annulated boa. Now, the annulated boa is actually a member of the genus Corallus, along with their more popular and more famous cousins, the emerald tree boa and the Amazon tree boa. Now, this one is actually really cool because the annulated boa is actually the farthest ranging north of any of the Corallus boas. And in fact, so far north, they're even into parts of Central America and northern Colombia. The Amazon tree boa is definitely the most spread out, and the emerald tree boa is the most isolated as far as actual habitat goes, but the annulated boa is the furthest north reaching. They look very similar to that of their cousins, which is the fairly slender build, typically in that 5-ish foot long range, as well as the obvious and very classic archetype of arboreal constrictor snake, the very large triangular head. They don't have the heat pits like the green tree pythons do, but you can actually eye shine them like the emerald tree boas and the Amazon tree boas. Now, these guys aren't nearly as varied as the Amazon tree boas that come into, the whole myriad of different colors. They're more of a kind of mottled reddish brown that can vary in different brightnesses and tones and variations, but it's usually that kind of like red earthy tones, right? Now, more than one person individually who has worked and kept with them, as well as multiple places that I have read, so this is definitely more anecdotal, have actually said that they are more amiable or more willing or more accepting of being handled than both the Amazon tree boas and the emerald tree boas. So, grain of salt that part. Their care is pretty similar to that of the emeralds and the Amazon tree boas, although being the furthest north and closer to the equator, they're actually a little bit more heat tolerant and theoretically a little bit more sensitive to temperature and seasonal fluctuations. So as long as you're keeping things in a correct arboreal setup with a decent range of basking spots, ultraviolet light, ranging in temperatures and high humidity, then you're probably going to do pretty well keeping the annulated boa. And different people, again, this is a little bit more of the anecdotal part, but not a whole lot is known about these guys in whole, and that goes with pretty much every snake on this list, or is at least as well documented as many other well-known species. And that several people that have actually successfully bred them year after year have said that it is true that they think they get more success with having temperature cycling even more so than that of humidity or food cycling that we managed to recreate successfully with multiple species in captivity before. Next up, we're going to talk about one that you've definitely heard of their more famous cousin, the Kenyan sand boa. But we're actually going to talk about the rough-scale sand boa, sometimes called the Russell's boa because of their unfortunate similarity to a more infamous animal that shares their range. And we'll get into that in just a second. So, obviously, a sand boa, it's a very fossorial snake. They're found in parts of India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Being more of a sand boa, they're usually found in more arid, dry areas, and they have very small keeled scales and a very small rounded head, and they're a relatively short animal as far as boas go. And all of these things mean that it looks very similar to the Russell's pit viper. The number one, or I should say it's argued between them and the Indian cobra for the most bites of any snake in India. So not really great as far as the PR goes for the Russells or the rough-scale sand boa. But if we can move past that and actually having them in captivity in our actual hands, they're a really cool species of snake. They don't vary as much in coloration as that of like the Kenyan sand boas, so they're not as bright as like the Saharans or some of the other ones, but they are really cool. They're kind of more of like a gray to brown to orangey tones with really nice, beautiful, bold, dark striping that goes along the dorsal part of their bodies. Now, just like in the usual sand boa build, as I mentioned before, they have that small head, the kind of more short, blunted, rounded tail that can act as kind of like a decoy as opposed to a predator going for their tail and instead of going for their head. These guys are about 3-ish feet long for the females. They're a little bit larger. Males typically stay under 2 feet, so it follows the usual boid type mentality as far as body size and sexual morphology goes. They're relatively easy to take care of in captivity. If you can keep a Kenyan sand boa, you can pretty much take care of a roughscale sand boa. And then because we're going to continue along with this little theme that we have going of more anecdotal stories, because again, it's really difficult to have a whole lot of really nice, varied, and consistent information on a lot of these less well-known species. And that is, there was actually one case where someone who had been keeping them for a large number of years, one captive-born animal, a mature adult, actually displayed one instance of caudal luring, which means that it actually sat there and wiggled its tail in an effort to attract prey before actually predating on that little rodent. Who knows if that's 100% the case, but I think it's really cool because a lot of people think that just the sand boas in general just only stay under the sand and only come up and graboid them, when in reality they actually can predate and go into a lot of different habitats, not just the rough-scale sand boas, but even the more famous Kenyan sand boas, and here is a very good example of them doing just that. With that being said, the rough-scale sand boa is a really cool species of boa. They're fairly readily available if you go to the different locality boa type people, and they're probably one of the more common ones on this list if you were to go out and actually look for one to keep as a pet. Next up is a really cool species of boa, and that is the Bahamian boa. Bahamian boa? Bohemian Rhapsody boa? Anyway, the Bahamian boa is a really cool species of relatively small boa that belongs to a fairly large family of boas that are sometimes called the Antilles boas. The more famous members include the Dominican red mountain boa, the Cuban boa, Jamaican boa, those type of constrictor snakes, right? The Bahamian boa is really cool. There's actually 5 different subspecies of them. Some of them only live on very specific islands, so they're all a little bit different looking, kind of similar to that of the different giant tortoises found in Galapagos, only a little bit more varied. The nominate species, Strigalata strigularis, which most people just refer to as the Bahamian boa, lives on the kind of the widest and the largest spread across the island chain of the Bahamas. Now, as I said before, it's relatively small, fairly slender. It's about 4 to 5-ish feet long. Large females will rarely hit 6 feet long, and they are semi-ish arboreal. They have known to have been feeding on both bats and birds, as well as mammals and younger ones. This seems to be the case with a lot of species of boas, and snakes in general, sometimes feed on frogs and small lizards. Now, they're not super bright colored, although they do have a fair amount of iridescence. They're kind of more of like an earthy gray-black tone, sometimes a little bit more orange or brown, and then on their dorsal side or their top part, it's a little bit more of a darker, bolder stripe. I think they're really, really cool, and it's actually one of the very few animals on this list, and while I have seen most of them in person, it's one of the very few ones that I've actually able to physically handle before. And if I can remember to find the actual picture, and I'm going to really hope I took a picture of this. If not, forgive me for this little story. When we went and visited the Phoenix Herpetological Society a couple years ago, they're actually one of the few people or areas or places or zoological facilities that actually does have a living, breathing Bahamian boa. And it was really cool to see one. Next up is honestly what might be the most striking boa of this entire list, although it might be the smallest one at that. We are talking about the Panamanian dwarf boa. Now, this is a very small but very beautiful, striking, bold-looking snake. They belong to the group of snakes called the Tropidophis snakes. These are the true dwarf boas. I mentioned them in previous videos before. They're not what a lot of people consider true boas, and they're not even in the Boidae family. So boa constrictors, pythons, those are Boidae. Actually, the pythons are Pythonidae. They used to be Boidae. But there's Boidae. Those are the constrictors, the Dumerals boas, even the Antilles boas, like the Dominican red mountain boa and the Bahamian boa. These guys are a little bit different, but they do give birth to live young, so they're generally considered a boa species. As I said before, they're very small. They usually stay under 2 feet long. The weird thing about these guys is actually that the males typically average a little bit longer, but the females have much more body mass to them. Kind of weird, right? When you look at them, kind of very similar to a lot of the different boa ones. They're not super bright and striking. They're kind of a more gray, earthy tone, again, as the common theme of this video, but they have really, really beautiful triangular shaped patterns. Not really a diadem, they are really more triangular shaped that goes along the entire their entire top part of their bodies. Really, really cool. We don't know too much about these guys, or really, we don't know too much about a lot of the different Tropidophis boas, or Tropidophis boas. that, and I mean, we really don't at all. We think that they eat a lot of lizards and birds, but we're not really sure. We think they're almost exclusively arboreal, but we're not really sure. We think they have very small litters, but we're not very sure. There's not a whole lot of them kept in captivity, and as far as I know, the list is less than 5 or 6 people in this entire country, period. Who knows? We are learning more and more every year about this really cool Central to South American dwarf species of boa. Obviously, Panama, it's the more Central American. They're even found in a few other different Central American countries in that same area. And we are learning more and more about them every single year, so who knows? Maybe down the road, if they are found to not be threatened, they are allowed to be exported out for future captive breeding programs, then maybe more people have access to these very beautiful, very striking boas. But if that's not the case and we can manage to preserve a really nice big chunk of rainforest for these guys to live in, even better. Last up, if you are a true reptile aficionado, or at the very least Facebook thinks you are, this is one that you may have heard a name very close to what we're talking about. And this species is the round island boa. Now what I mean by at least Facebook thinks you are, you've probably seen articles linking or talking about the round island burrowing boa. There were 2 separate species of boas, one the boa and then one the burrowing boa, found on Round Island. Unfortunately, the burrowing boa went extinct and was declared extinct back in 1975. The Round Island boa, the currently existing extant one, is still kicking it, although definitely endangered due to a multitude of reasons, most of which are people's fault. At one point, there were less than 200 animals left in the wild. Now they estimate populations around 1,500 plus, so hooray for small victories. Now this is a very unusual species of snake, and they have a bunch of really weird adaptations that make them incredibly unique and intriguing to talk about. So the Round Island boa, is a very slender, fairly small boa. They're not very round. They're fairly arboreal. They only get about 4-ish feet long at max, typically in more that 3-foot range. They're very nocturnal. They're not really crepuscular, as well as they eat a lot of geckos, which is unusual for a boa species, but not unheard of. Now let's talk about some of those attributes that make it very unique and intriguing. First of which is that they actually go through an ontogenetic change, which means they are born one way, looking one way, a color a certain way, and then as they change to an adult, they look separately, which isn't unheard of by any means. There's a very famous example of that, and that's the green tree python, right? Another one is that they actually have very small keeled scales, which, again, unusual, but not unheard of. We even mentioned in this video the roughscale sambo. So why am I bringing this up? And that has to do with the very last attribute. Every single species of snake that we know of, for the most part, has a non-connected lower jaw. They have elastic tissue that goes in between their lower jaws that allows them to spread their mouth open very wide to eat large prey items. The round island boa actually has a separated maxillary joint. And so what that means in layman's terms is that their top jaw is separated. It is not connected. They can split their top jaw open. And that makes them the only, not only snake species, the only currently existing vertebrate species that has a split top jaw, which is why they are sometimes called the split jaw boa. Not a whole lot of people work with these guys in captivity, period, so not a whole lot is known about these guys or why the reason why they have this. One theory is that it's because of where they live. There's not really any other species that they've ever really seen predating or even have a whole lot of opportunity to predate on other than reptiles. And they think that there are some extinct species of reptiles that also had that split maxillary bone. They think maybe it's just a hold onto or a callback to animals that only ate those things. Maybe, possibly, we're not 100% sure. Either way, super unique, super cool. These guys are a really interesting species of boa. Now, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. If you want, please click on the playlist here of the other top 5 videos. It really helps my click-through rate. If you can, please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Just another quick little reminder, I'm not going to do this with every video, but I'm going to keep bringing it up. Once we get 5,000 subscribers, we're going to do a full property tour. So this building, quarantine, the livestock animals outside, the livestock guarding dogs outside, the pond, everything. Full tour. as well as at 10,000 subscribers, we're going to do an animal giveaway. So if you can, please share with your friends, subscribe, let me know if you have any questions, comments, want to see other videos down below. If you want to support me in more ways than just view, which I super appreciate already, I do have a Patreon that's linked below in the description of this and every other video. Thank you again so much. Hope you're having a great day, and we'll check you next time.